Right, thanks very much. So as I said, the purpose of the webinar is to talk about collaboration within the context of competition law requirements in South Africa. And this is an important topic because many of the organizations and companies that we engage with, and that's also being engaged by Consumer Goods Council and Weber Wenzel, are interested in working collaboratively in their sectors towards sharing circular economy and plastic commitments. This is often a tricky topic for these organizations because they are not always sure and certain about what type of information can be shared and how to engage with potential competitors on topics that essentially should be pre-competitive. So working towards sustainability and circular economy and plastic commitments, ideally this is not a space where companies should be competing with each other, but rather they should be engaging collaboratively and working together and sharing information where they can, where it does not contribute any commercial information or competition regulations. So this is exactly the purpose of the webinar, is to have an engagement and a discussion and share some information to make it easier for these organizations to engage with each other and ultimately to work towards a circular economy for plastic and other sustainability commitments as well. So this session will include an expert presentation from Weber Wenzel, and then afterwards there will be a panel discussion with SA Plastics Pact members, just for them to share some insights and learnings about the collaborations that they're involved in and the work that they're currently doing. This is just a quick overview of the agenda. So for now, just in terms of the house rules, I would ask for everybody to just remain muted. And at the end, there will be an opportunity for questions when we have the panel discussion. Please also feel free to post any questions and things like that in the chat while we're busy. As I said, we only have an hour, but we will address, if there's too many questions and we can't get to everything, we will address those questions by email afterwards as well. So from the Green Cape and Plastics Pact side, I've got Kirsten here in the room with me, and then Nick from the communications team is also online. And just quickly to go through the agenda, I've already started with an introduction and overview. Then I will hand over to competition, to the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa to do a quick welcoming of their members. Then I'll hand over to Dudu, who will run us through her presentation about the competition law in the context of collaborative initiatives. Then I will quickly give an overview of the Plastics Pact and the work that we're doing with brand owners, retailers, recyclers, and converters in South Africa. And then we will head over to the panel discussion. Okay, and then quickly I'll hand over to Tokoloko from the Consumer Goods Council just to welcome their members.
Good morning, Ron. Thank you. I'm Sokolo Mangwale from the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. We are a supporting member of the SA Plastic Pact. As you may know, the CGCSA is an industry association body with thousands of FMCG members who engage in discussion to ensure one voice for the industry. So it is most important for our members to understand competition law and its benefits. This will ensure members are able to share information considering the limitation provided by the law and encourage collaboration amongst them. We are looking forward to a fruitful and informative discussion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And then I'll hand over to Dudu, and let me just stop my sharing my screen. And then in the meantime, I'll do a quick introduction for her. So let me just find my notes. So Dudu Mugabe is a senior associate at Weber Wenzel. She advises on all aspects of competition law, including merger applications, prohibited practices, compliance, and general competition law advice. She has expertise in the agribusiness, property, retail, and telecommunications sectors. Okay, I'll give over to you, Dudu, to share your presentation and to get going with that.
Dudu, you're on. There we go.
Please tell me if you can see my screen clearly.
We can see your screen. You just need to go into presenter mode. then what I'm seeing is you just have to swap it around.
You click on the display settings.
Okay.
And then you can switch
Then
top
this
view.
is- There you go.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. As Ruan said, I am Dudu Mohabi and I am a senior associate at Weber Wenzel. So today I will be going through some general principles on competition law and more so in the context of collaborative initiatives. Given the short time that we have, I will not go into detail, but I understand that a lot of the parties here come from firms or industries where they do have their own legal counsel that can assist them with some competition law advice, but otherwise my details are also available should you need to go in depth in some of the topics that we will be discussing today. So what we will be looking at, we will be going back to basics and understanding what is competition law. We will then look at how competition law then regulates interactions between competitors. We will then consider the basic principles relating to information exchange, particularly in the context of industry associations. As Tsohologo mentioned, that the CGSA is an industry association. We will then look at interactions between customers and suppliers, because in the way that the SA Plastic Pact operates, we see that the participants include not only competitors, but also manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and so forth that would then be in this customer and supplier relationships. We then will look at abuse of dominance, and lastly, a very topical issue relating to ESG and competition law globally. So what is competition law? So competition law is intended to essentially create a level playing field between big and small businesses to ensure that there is effective competition in the market. This is generally for the benefit of consumers in terms of making sure that they are freely able to choose, the goods and services that they're purchasing, that there's quality of goods and services, and that the goods and services that they purchase are well priced. So in South Africa, our competition law generally focuses on, or particularly focuses on, promoting the ability of small and medium businesses, as well as those firms that are controlled by historically disadvantaged persons, to enter into, participate, and grow in the market. There are three key elements to competition law. The first one being mergers, and that relates to the acquisition of control of a firm. And there, the competition authorities will consider competition aspects as well as public interest grounds in order to determine whether or not to approve a merger. Then the second one relates to prohibited practices, and that deals with certain conduct that is prohibited where the engagements between competitors, those in a horizontal relationship, or between suppliers and customers, and that is in a vertical relationship. And then lastly, we look at abuse of dominance, and this really is about the conduct of those firms that are considered to have a dominant position or market position. There are two broad classes of anti-competitive conduct that we get, and it's either exclusion or collusion. So in the case of collusion, this is where firms decide to cooperate with one another to restrict their own output, and therefore has a detrimental impact on the market. Or you get exclusion, or an exclusionary conduct or practice, which relates to a conduct of a firm or even firms impeding or preventing other firms from entering into, participating, or expanding within the market. So before we get into the nitty-gritties, it's important that we understand the consequences for contravening the Competition Act, so that, yes, we all know what we're getting into before we engage with each other. So there is an administrative penalty that can be levied on one of up to 10% of a firm's annual turnover from South Africa. If it is a repeat offense, it is up to 25%. But you not only face a penalty, it is possible that third parties that have been disadvantaged as a result of your conduct can bring civil damages in relation to the firm for your conduct. But there's also personal criminal liability under the Competition Act for those directors or persons in management positions that are considered to have committed an offense if they've caused the firm to engage in cartel conduct or knowingly acquiesce in the firm engaging in cartel conduct. So such a director or manager would be liable for a fine not exceeding 5 100,000 Rand, or imprisonment for a period of not exceeding 10 years, or it could be both. But other than this personal criminal liability, there are other considerations such as your reputation that's affected as that particular person or as the business as a whole. The business could be affected as there could be invasive investigations going into the business as a result of this conduct. There's also disciplinary procedures that have to be done to get to the, to determine who did what in relation to this conduct that contravenes the Competition Act. So with that in mind, we now start with our interaction with competitors. And just an analogy that we use for you to understand how the Competition Act actually regulates the conduct. You get those prohibitions, which we say are your red light conduct, right? And if it's a red light, it says, you absolutely cannot do this. This is prohibited, and you cannot raise any pro-competitive justifications in terms of this particular conduct. Then you also get your rule of reason prohibitions, and we say these are amber light, and they're amber light because you still can't do them, but the difference is you can justify it if you can show that there is a technological efficiency or other pro-competitive gain that outweighs the anti-competitive effect. And with both of them, there is an administrative penalty that can be charged. So in understanding first how the Competition Commission then, or the Competition Act, regulates horizontal relationships, that is parties that are competitors, we need to understand who are competitors, right? So it can be an actual competitor or a potential competitor. So this means a firm or a person that can or is able to offer the same or similar products or services that is offered by another. So here the examples I've used, I've chosen not to use what would be common to participants here today, which is the retailers or industries that we have, but instead what is closer to home based on our everyday. Looking, for example, at OTT platforms, a competitor would be, say, your Netflix and your Hulu, or closer to home, Netflix and Showmax, for example. You have your indirect competitors, and that could be your McDonald's and any other restaurant like a Pizza Hut. But you also get competition on the level where if you have a smartphone and you're taking a picture, you can take it through your smartphone or you can take it through a camera. So that is essentially who your competitors could be in a particular market. So now we get to the provisions of the Act. And in terms of Section 4(1)(a), and this is amber light conduct. And already when you see amber light conduct, you know that this can be then justified if there is certain technical efficiency or other competitive gains. But essentially, Section 4(1)(a) prohibits any firm that is a competitor or parties that are in a relationship from engaging in an agreement, concerted practice, or a decision that would have the effect of substantially preventing or lessening competition, unless, of course, you can show that technological efficiency or other pro-competitive gain. An example of that is, for example, a joint venture agreement, which is for a particular objective or purpose, or agreements between industry associations like collaboration on, say, something like the SA Plastics Pact, because there's a particular objective to that. There may be a technological efficiency or other pro-competitive gain as a result of these collaborations. Then you get your Section 4(1)(b) prohibition, and this is a red light conduct, meaning that it's absolutely prohibited and there is no justification. And this is where competitors get into an agreement or a concerted practice where they directly or indirectly fix prices, where they divide the markets by allocating customers, suppliers, or territories. For example, say, I know we've got, I think, SPAR and Pick n Pay on the panel. Say Pick n Pay says, I'm just going to focus on the Western Cape, and another says that I'm going to focus only on Limpopo, and they're now all comfortable knowing that they have divided a market and they guaranteed that particular market, just as an example. Or you get collusive tendering or bid rigging, which can happen in various instances. But for example, where two bidders decide that one is going to bid low and the other is going to bid high, hoping that the one that bids low will get the bid, and the next time around it goes the other way. Or instances where you decide not to bid so that there is no competition in a particular bid process and it goes to the person that you agreed with, and the next time around again it's your turn to bid. So it's it could be then bid rigging, which is then considered an absolute prohibition. In both Section 4(1)(a) and 4(1)(b), the connecting factor that you see is not only what is a competitor, but also what is an agreement or concerted practice. An agreement is a contract or an agreement or an understanding. It can be enforceable or not enforceable, but it generally requires the parties express their joint intention to act in a specific way. Whereas with a concerted practice, on the other hand, this is where you are cooperating with each other, or there's coordinated conduct. And this is not always through direct contact with each other, it can be indirect conduct, but essentially it replaces your independent action, where maybe because you've had access to, say, competitively sensitive information that now influences your conduct as competitors in the market. So this leads us very nicely into information exchange, as well as industry association and joint ventures, which I think is something that everybody that's here today, particularly in the context of the CGSA, as well as the SA Plastic Pact, should pay more attention to in this presentation. So just the basic principles on information sharing. The Commission is generally very suspicious of any information sharing between competitors, more so where this information is competitively sensitive information, as it could be seen as facilitating cartel conduct. Our cartel conduct is the price fixing, the market division, as well as that bid rigging that we just discussed. Also because it reduces the uncertainty of competition, because if you know what your competitor is doing, it can soften or dampen competition or your desire to actually compete with your competitor. So then we need to understand what is competitively sensitive information. This is information that's not in the public domain. It is strategic to your business. It is recent or future information, and it is individualized, meaning that it relates to a clearly identifiable business and is not aggregated. So these are just some examples that about what competitively sensitive information could be: your rebates, your formulas, capacities, output, your volumes, orders, margins, etc. And looking at some of them, I know you could argue, especially even in the case of retailers, that, well, some of this information is publicly available, so could I not use this information? And that then we say is possible. It's permissible for you to actually use information that is publicly available, either through, and I'll go back to the previous slides, either through trade publication, press releases, brochures, annual reports, the media, analyst reports, market research reports. So you can get some of that information through these public mediums, and that is okay, that is permissible. It's also permissible where you receive the information from a customer, provided that that customer is also not a competitor, and provided that you as competitors did not agree with each other, that you will actually exchange the information through a customer, so the customer being a conduit for you to exchange competitively sensitive information. Then what is also permissible is you as an industry association, for example, discussing changes in the law that's relevant to the industry or health and safety issues, for example. So now we segue nicely into industry associations or trade associations, which are not unlawful and actually serve a useful purpose. And we see this obviously through the CGSA, as Tsokolo has said, that it's about making sure that the industry speaks with one voice, but we see it also through these great initiatives such as the SA Plastic Pact, so it's for a useful purpose. But by their nature, there are areas of risk because they require that competitors gather together. So as a result, the Commission is very suspicious because this could be seen as a potential for colluding with each other. So where there are these trade associations or industry associations and you hold workshops such as this, for example, and maybe there's discussions on norms and standards as well, you must make sure that it is accessible to all market participants and that it is based on clear, unbiased and objective criteria. Where you collaborate on industry norms and standards, for example, such as deciding that all the retailers are going to move to a specific, say, glass product instead of a plastic product. You must make sure that in doing so, this is objective, it's reasonable, and it's agnostic in that it is not prescriptive of the party that's involved and doesn't lead to exclusion of a market player. So here it's important that we go through the do's and don'ts and what you need to be cautious of when you are in these trade associations. So definitely do not discuss any competitively sensitive information such as your prices, your price elements, credit terms, market share, suppliers, customers, etc., or even agree to that. Do not, as an industry association, place any pressure on your members to adopt a particular policy in their organization. This must definitely be a voluntary, and the party must be able to pull out if they want to. You should also not be participating in any unofficial meetings on any subject. But of course, if there are any meetings, it's important for you to first and foremost get legal advice, even when you're about to agree on any industry code, any industry standard or membership standards, where there's a collection or dissemination of industry information. And again, this must be in aggregated form, or where you guys just decide to even collaborate. You really need to seek advice beforehand. What can you discuss? Information that's already publicly available, industry-related information. And when you are discussing this information, make sure that there is an agenda that you stick to beforehand. Keep minutes of these discussions, keep proper records of these discussions, and excuse yourself if you feel uncomfortable with the particular conversation at the time. And if you're not at the meeting, actually make sure that it is minuted that you are not there or that you excused yourself. So sometimes in these collaborative initiatives, we see companies wanting to maybe start a joint venture together. And a joint venture would be if you have two separate companies and now you decide to form one, but for a particular objective, such as maybe research and development, production, distribution, marketing, or exploration. And some of the concerns that arise as a result of that is that if you have your joint venture, for example, you still do have your competing two businesses on the side. So you must make sure that as a result of you being in this joint venture, there aren't any restrictions on your normal competition in terms of the two separate businesses you have, and that it's not dampening your desire to actually compete with one another, that you don't use it as a platform for you to be able to share information that you shouldn't be sharing with each other, or even placing any restraints on each other that are unrelated to the joint venture itself, but actually relate to the two competing businesses. So it's important that when you want to do not just these joint ventures in general, but even these collaborative projects, that you make sure that you don't use it as a platform or a conduit for you to engage in sharing competitively sensitive information that could be seen or result in collusion. So going back to that, what you need to avoid in the case of a JV is making sure that it doesn't dampen your ability to compete in the market. There aren't any restrictions on the agreement that are unrelated to the purpose of the JV. And that if you have management on both the JV as well as the separate companies, that management is well positioned so that there isn't any sharing of information of any sort. So then this leads us again nicely into information sharing guidelines that were released or published by the Competition Commission in early 2023. And this actually came from the cries, right, of industry associations saying to the Commission, we are collaborating more and more, especially when we see, for example, the crises that are coming in the country or in the world, like our energy crisis or during COVID, for example. So companies said, how can we then collaborate with each other? But if we're collaborating, what can and cannot share with each other? So these guidelines then detail the type of information exchange that may be potentially harmful and which exchange may enhance efficiencies. And then there are certain factors or general factors that they look at in order to determine where to place the information essentially. So we look at, for example, market characteristics. How concentrated is the market? Is there a history of collusion in the market? What's the transparency of the information in the market? We look at how available or accessible the information is in the market. Is it publicly available? Where did the information come from? Is the information historical, or does it relate to any current or future activities? And lastly, what is the information used for? What is the purpose? So if it is used for pro-competitive, objective initiatives or purposes, then the sharing is essentially allowed. But again, it's making sure that it's not competitively sensitive information that's shared for ulterior purposes. So in our training on interactions with competitors, we need to update our compliance policies and make sure that when we are involved in these industry collaboration initiatives and so forth, we adhere or get guidance from these guidelines on exchange of competitively sensitive information. Now I'm going to talk you through interactions with customers and suppliers. So generally, there is a concern where these vertical arrangements, that is arrangements between an upstream input supplier or even your retailers and so forth, results in concerns where there's a limiting of freedom to price, or where there's certain exclusivity or any other selective or restrictive manner in the conduct in which parties engage with each other. So anti-competitive vertical arrangements are viewed in respect of how they limit inter and intra-brand competition. So here we again have our amber light conduct, and that's your section 5.1. When we see amber light, we know that it is possible, if we've engaged in this kind of conduct, that we can show any technological efficiency or other pro-competitive gain as a result of that conduct. So in terms of section 5.1, you cannot agree, if you're in a vertical relationship, if the agreement has the effect of substantially preventing or lessening competition in a market, unless you can show the benefits of that. Then you have your red light conduct, which is your minimum resale price maintenance. That is absolutely prohibited. There is no justification. You cannot say to a reseller that you need to sell your product at this particular price and unilaterally impose that on that reseller. So even having a punishing mechanism, for example, that basically forces the reseller to adhere to a particular pricing policy. But we know in terms of section 5.3a and b that it is possible, despite section 5.2, that you may recommend a minimum resale price to your reseller, provided that it is clear that it's a recommendation and not binding, and that the product specifically states that it's a recommended price and not a stated price. That one was quick and easy. And similarly, abuse of dominance, we will not spend a lot of time on that. But essentially, this is regarding persons who have a dominant market position, and the test is twofold. So you either have the market share test. So a firm is dominant if it is considered to at least have 45% market share. If it has 35% market share, but less than 45% market share, unless it can show that it does not have market power, or where a firm has less than 35% market share but has market power. So in the case of market power, this is where a firm is able to either control prices or to exclude competition or behave to an appreciable extent in a manner that is independent from its competitors, customers, as well as suppliers. So this is where you're able to act outside of all the market conditions around you. And what the commission or the authorities will look at is how you set your prices, whether there's excess capacity in the particular market, how you interact in the first place with your competitors and customers, barriers to entry, as well as the profits that you make. So what can you not do as a firm that is dominant? So there are either pricing practices you cannot do, or non-pricing practices. In relation to your pricing practices, as a dominant firm, you may not charge an excessive price, that is pricing too high. You may not charge predatory pricing, that is pricing too low, or discriminating in terms of the price between similar or competing customers. But then you also get your non-pricing practices. This is sometimes your general exclusionary practices, unless you can also show that there is a technological or efficiency or other competitive gain for that particular exclusion. Or you get your specified exclusionary practices, such as refusing to give a competitor access to an essential facility, or requiring or inducing a supplier or customer not to deal with another competitor, refusing to supply scarce goods, where you are engaging in tying and bundling, buying up scarce goods or services, or even discriminating between producers in respect of the purchase of goods and services. We also then, in terms of abuse of dominance, get your buyer power or monopsony provisions. Here, what the Act prohibits is basically imposing or requiring unfair pricing or other trading conditions on your small, medium businesses, as well as your historically disadvantaged suppliers. And this is if you're in a particular sector like your agro-processing, grocery, wholesale and retail, as well as e-commerce and online. The minister has published regulations. There are also guidelines that give effect to these provisions. The onus is on the dominant firm to definitely show that they prices that they're charging or paid or the other trading conditions that they've imposed are not unfair. And there also is an anti-avoidance provision that prevents this dominant buyer from avoiding to deal with an SME or an HDP to avoid the application of this particular provision. Similarly, in relation to price discrimination, it is prohibited price discrimination if the conduct is likely to have the effect of substantially preventing or lessening competition or impeding the ability of SMEs and HDPs from participating effectively in the market. Again, there are regulations and guidelines that give effect to this. The onus, again, is on the dominant firm to show that its prices are not discriminatory and that they are otherwise justified. There is, again, an anti-avoidance provision to ensure that you do not try to avoid dealing with an HDP for you to circumvent the provisions of this act, of this specific provision. Now on to our last topic, which I think also nicely ties up with what the SA Plastic Pact is doing. So globally, we see that in the EU and in the UK, there has been specific guidelines that are set to deal with how companies jointly, especially those that are competitors, jointly agree to sustainability initiatives, as they call them. So in terms of their competition rules, a joint sustainability agreement is unlikely to raise competition issues where it does not concern the economic activities of undertakings and is instead involved with the internal corporate conduct, for example, measures to eliminate single-use plastics, where there are agreements between participants to set up a database regarding suppliers that are unsustainable in terms of their value chains, unsustainable in their production processes, unsustainable in their inputs, as well as agreements between competitors to raise customer awareness on the environmental impact that might be had as a result of your conduct. So similarly, in the UK, while these are only draft guidelines, there are similar guidance on these environmental sustainability agreements. And I think the principle, which is what really this entire presentation was touching on, particularly in relation to these collaborative initiatives that are for socio-economic purposes, it is important that if you are going to do this, there is essentially no issue in doing it in competition law, provided that it does not impact in any way the way that you compete as competitors in the market. So it should not have an effect on the main parameters of competition, that is your pricing, your quality, your choice, your innovation. So outside of your normal business and for your normal businesses, you can do these initiatives, but as long as it doesn't have an effect on your competition. So agreements, again, that are unlikely to infringe on competition laws, it's agreements which concern the internal corporate conduct of businesses, again, like eliminating single-use plastic, or an agreement to pool funds to engage in activities to mitigate or adapt, for example, the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, or agreements relating to joint campaigns to raise awareness or joint lobbying for policy or legislative changes. So in South Africa, we don't have this yet, but we know that our regulators do look at and are influenced by what our other jurisdictions like, the UK or EU do. So hopefully in time we'll also see guidance and guidelines coming up, allowing initiatives like the SA Plastic Pact to even lobby for policies or legislative changes in relation to the targets that the Plastic Pact wants to meet. And I just want to end off lastly with the application of the Act in terms of the Competition Act. And I'm now reading at section 3.1, which says that the Act applies to all economic activity within or having an effect within the Republic, except where concerted conduct is designed to achieve a non-commercial, socio-economic objective or similar purpose. So while this is not a silver bullet to say that you guys can collude or use that as a justification, I think it's important to know that while competition law is intended, to make sure that there is a playing field, there is a recognition that we operate in a broader society where there are socio-economic objectives that have to be met. So with that said, I think I will now hand over back to Ruan for the rest of the program.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, David. That's very informative and interesting. And just to let everybody know, there was obviously a lot of information. We'll share the recording afterwards and the presentation as well, just so that you can have a look and a listen again on your own time. So now I'll just quickly do a quick overview of the Plastics Pact and the type of collaborative work that is being done. Let me just go into presenter mode quickly. And then after this, we'll head into the panel discussion. Okay, so essentially, the South African Plastics Pact is an initiative that was established by different companies in South Africa as well as NGOs back in 2020. And the whole idea was to set up this collaborative initiatives where organizations can work together to address the problem of plastic pollution in the environment. So the role of the Plastics Pact is to create this space where competition issues don't necessarily come into the conversation, just to allow for these companies to work together and collaboratively without contravening competition law regulations. So essentially, it's to create a non-competitive environment where it's about topics that the organizations shouldn't necessarily be competing about. It's about sustainability. It's about working together towards a circular economy for plastic packaging, where competition shouldn't really come into the equation. It should just facilitate the emergence of the circular economy for plastic packaging in South Africa. So as mentioned, the overarching goal of the South African Plastics Pact is to work towards a circular economy for plastic in South Africa with the benefits of job creation, economic growth, and the prevention of plastic waste pollution in the environment. Now, the way in which the initiative works is that companies sign up to 4 very ambitious targets and commitments, and to achieve these commitments is relatively difficult. It's not something that any one organization can achieve in isolation. It's something that requires collaboration and cooperative work. I won't then go into the details of every target, but ultimately these targets address different parts of the value chain, and as organizations work towards the targets, it will facilitate the emergence of the circular economy for plastic packaging, which has a positive and beneficial impact, both in terms of creating economic growth and job creation in South Africa, as well as addressing some of the more negative implications that sometimes comes associated with plastic pollution and plastic ending up where it should not be ending up in. So essentially, within the Plastics Pact, there's a lot of collaboration already happening. We've got a variety of different action groups and working groups that pull together different organizations and industries and companies to work towards these shared commitments. So I'll mention a couple of examples before we head into the panel discussion. So we've got 3 very active action groups at the moment. The first one is focused on flexibles, and the flexibles action group culminated in a pitch event where different packaging manufacturers could come and pitch their solutions for multi-layer flexible packaging that's currently not recycled in South Africa. So the companies could come and pitch their solutions to the Plastics Pact members, and then the Plastics Pact members were free to engage with those organizations on an individual basis to find out if there is a way in which to incorporate those solutions within their organizations. Then there's also the design for circularity action group where the members are working together to develop guidelines, so essentially a guidance document that will allow and help them to design packaging with circularity in mind, and ultimately will help them move towards targets. And then finally, we also have an e-commerce action group. So obviously, online shopping and e-commerce is really a very big growing industry in South Africa, and many of our members, the retailers, and we've got an e-commerce member as well, are increasingly involved in growing their e-commerce businesses. So what we're trying to achieve through the e-commerce action group is to ensure that we can incorporate some of these circularity guidelines and commitments as this industry grows, so that in the future there isn't a significant sort of negative impact associated with all the packaging that's being used there. So now that was just a quick overview of the Plastics Pact. We'll head into the panel discussion. I'm sorry. If, we can leave the questions for a bit later. So let's just get into the panel, and then any comments and questions can be posted in the chat as well. So I'll just quickly introduce the different webinar speakers or the panel speakers, and then we can get into the discussion. So firstly, we have Claire Anderson from Pick n Pay. She is the product manager of processed and non-edible groceries. Then we have Chandru Wadwani, who's the joint managing director of Extrapet, one of the largest recyclers in South Africa. We also have Devin Galtree, who is the group packaging manager of SPAR. And of course, we have Dudu as part of the panel as well, and we've already introduced her. So from now, I'll just stop sharing my screen, and then we can get into the panel discussion. Okay. So the first question is directed at Dudu. And then some of these, so Dudu, some of this question, you've touched on some of the elements already in your presentation, but maybe we can just hear quickly from you again. So some organizations and companies are hesitant to engage in collaborative discussions like this one that we're having right now, just because of anxieties and uncertainty about competition regulations. So in terms of participating and sharing views and insights on in a meeting like this, is that something that companies should be concerned about to participate in this type of discussion?
So I think, as you said, I mean, I've touched on this in the presentation already, but what is important is remembering what is the purpose of that discussion in the first place, right? So if we're looking to collaborate for an initiative that has a socioeconomic impact, that in terms of competition law would be okay. The issue would be that you just cannot discuss information that is competitively sensitive with each other. So I think in public forums like this, it is very easy beforehand to already prepare and know what is going to be said, and that we do not touch on anything that is of strategy to the particular individual companies that are participants in the different discussions. But I think at a high level, we can always discuss, you know, initiatives and issues that plague the industry as a whole and what our solutions to that could be. So I think the comfort is knowing that the Competition Commission does engage and allow for these kinds of collaborative initiatives and allows the discussions to happen. And in public forums, it's very easy then to avoid going into discussions on strategy, pricing, or otherwise. So yeah, that should be okay.
Great, thanks very much, Dudu. And then the next question is for Devin. So essentially, SPAR and yourself has been involved in many of the different collaborative workshops and initiatives as part of the South African Plastics Pact. So just quickly, in terms of your view, what is the benefit for SPAR in participating in these types of engagement? And secondly, do you think that companies, brand owners, and retailers should be competing about packaging sustainability and designing for recyclability?
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having us today. So I guess upon entering into or becoming members of the SA Plastics Pact, for us, we've always seen it as a collaborative space. We've always also understood that as much as SPAR in our own right, would like to do as much as we can to create solutions for not having materials in the environment. We understand we can't do it on our own. We're just not big enough. And so when the proposal of the Pact getting formed together, we were extremely excited. And I guess everything that we expected from the Pact in terms of the collaboration is certainly coming out in some way or other. And it's extremely encouraging to see members on the Pact that all have the same values and the same culture. And so we found that extremely beneficial. I guess getting to your second question, in that, you know, should packaging, sustainable packaging be used as, let's call it marketing material, etc., or competitiveness? I don't believe so. I believe that we need to all be pulling, you know, again, if we aren't collaborating on the same material types and choices for designing for circularity, etc., then we're not going to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve if we all start doing things differently. So in our view, is that the more we can do together in terms of these material types and streamlining materials to be able to fit into current existing systems in South Africa, for example, the business that Chandru runs, if we all start leading and designing in the same way, so that we have existing infrastructure that can process these materials into really good products that can be used again, then that shouldn't be done for any other reason but to eliminating plastic from our environment.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. And maybe I'll just direct to Luke for comment as well on that one. And specifically in terms of SPAR, obviously, in many of the organizations we engage with have set up this strategy to move towards more circular packaging and engage with their suppliers and the organizations within their value chain to implement some of those changes. But maybe Dudu, just to direct towards you to have a comment on that same question and on Devon's response as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Devon said is understandable, and it's clear that you would want to, because this is for the good of society and good for the environment, that all the industry participants move together in making sure that they eliminate, for example, the use of plastic as much as possible. This to me sort of tends towards maybe even saying, if we're moving together, having an acceptable industry standard. So the industry standard may not necessarily be worded as such that this is the standard, but in saying we're all going to move together and we all need to be developing and designing and doing something in a certain way, then to me it says that if we do so, we should just ensure that the criteria on which we do that is objective, it can be justified, and it is not prescriptive in terms of the participants that can do this. Because I think at the heart of these initiatives is making sure that there is nobody that is left behind or is excluded because they're unable to move with you at the same time in this particular initiative. And at the same time, remembering that there should be a level of voluntariness to the particular objective of moving together in terms of these particular initiative, that if somebody feels like that they cannot, while it is a great initiative, it can't be imposed on a person to do so in their respectable individual industries. But again, it is a socio-economic objective that is recognized by the competition authorities, that we all then need to do something that has a positive effect on our environment or on our communities and so forth. So long as we keep the principles in mind, then what you are doing definitely makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. And the next question will be for Claire from Pick n Pay. So previously, you've mentioned that it is sometimes difficult to move, to make decisions in terms of packaging choices because of the price impact that it might have. And this might relate to some of the target 1 items in the plastics pact. So of course, plastics pact is working towards circular plastics. So it's not necessarily always about elimination or replacing plastic with other materials, but rather with making the best packaging choices for the materials in question to allow for circular packaging in the future. Sometimes it is about replacing them with other materials though. But Claire, maybe let me get to the question. So in terms of your view in replacing certain items with alternatives where there is perhaps a cost impact, Could you perhaps give some examples of what you've been involved in and sort of the challenges that you face in that regard in trying to navigate some of those products and packaging types towards circularity without necessarily having too much of an impact on the price for the consumers? So Claire, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert like the others in the field. I'm just a retailer, and I'm very passionate about sustainability and making a difference. Certainly, we have many challenges here at Pick n Pay, and the biggest challenge is to find cost-effective replacements for packaging items. For a start, PVC blister packs, you know, those blister packs that you use for toys and cosmetics, and it's that plastic part in the front of the backing board. Apparently, it's not currently being recycled in South Africa. So, and also there's a poor customer perception, because if you heat it, apparently it emits toxic fumes. An alternative that we have explored is a PET blister pack. Although they are also not being recycled currently in SA, there's more potential for them to be recycled based on the PET thermofor recycling starting here now. And then just in conversations with some of our suppliers, they're willing to move over, but they're saying that they need a little bit more volume to be able to offer us better prices. So for example, if it was just Pick n Pay to move over, there would be an increase in the price per blister, which is not financially viable, hence the need to collaborate. And of course, that's where I get a little bit nervous in a sort of legal way. So that was just one of the examples. Another example is the multi-layer sort of doi bags. Obviously, there's a mix with PE, PET, and metals sometimes included as well. These are also not currently being recycled back into something equal or higher value, i.e. they don't follow the circular economy, which we want to. So yeah, if we had to move to a single material like LDPE, for example, there is an on-cost involved. And there are also obviously a few concerns around durability, which can be solved with shelf life testing, et cetera, et cetera. Do I have time for another example? Or
So maybe then I'll just direct it to you. So essentially, what he's saying is that there is willingness to explore these options and to introduce sort of more sustainable alternatives, but sometimes it's tricky because it might just be one company here and there. So for an organization like Pick n Pay and other retailers, how do they navigate that space where if there might be a price impact, but if more of the industry moves simultaneously, then that price impact, it would be less and it would be better for consumers and the companies involved. So how would you answer that? And just quickly, so that we have a couple of minutes left for Chandru's question as well.
I mean, I think if the issue goes to, because I think what Claire right now said was, if they're doing it alone, it becomes difficult because of the volume. So now you would need the other participants to come in so that you could build in your volume so that you can get it from that particular manufacturer or recycler, right? So with that, I think the concern would be that so long as you are not sharing your eventual pricing or even your volume information with your next competitor for you to be able to engage in this initiative, then that should be okay. So so a solution sometimes to interactions like that is where you have a party that's sort of aggregating the information of all the parties that are involved and then giving out to the supplier that you need so that they can then give it to the respective people without the information having been shared broadly. So the concern mainly is always that there isn't anything that's competitive that's being shared. And if we can avoid that, then essentially there would not be an issue with you collaborating so that you can get access to this particular product or whatever that would be essential, because you're also bringing a change to the market that is beneficial to the market. And so long as that also doesn't then affect the consumer in the eventual pricing.
okay, great. Thanks, Didi.
Okay, awesome. Thanks very much, Didi. And then with 6 minutes left, we'll move over to our last question, which is for Chandru. So essentially, Extrapet as a recycler is involved in a number of collaborative trials and tests with brand owners, retailers, and converters. And would you be able to give an example of one of these collaborative initiatives And perhaps, can you comment on how sharing more information more broadly from these tests and trials would actually have a positive impact, both in terms of circularity and in addressing some of the issues associated with packaging? So over to you, Chandru.
Thanks, Ron, and good morning to everyone. Maybe two quick examples, one of where it could have worked better and one where it has. One, pre-Pact was one of the early wins we scored, was the removal of green from the Sprite bottle. That was probably a good now 3-4 years ago. If we look at the landscape, I can't really think of any other brand owner that's done it. And to Dudu's point of trying to move everyone for the betterment of environment and society, it would be nice to have a platform where you could have multiple brand owners being part of a process where the learnings of one, and I think over and above the environmental benefits, has probably been cost benefits in terms of not having to add a master batch. So we're still fighting that battle with several brand owners. And one where post-Pact setup and adoption, where we've seen, I think, a meaningful change has been on shrink sleeve. I think a lot of discourse and dialogue on Pact meetings about the problem of PET and PVC shrink sleeves led to actually quite positive engagement from more than one brand owner, and simultaneously more than one label supplier. I think one of the problems brand owners and retailers have is this, and I think Claire alluded to it, as much as recyclers can work with converters on solutions, if there isn't critical mass to make it commercially viable, or if there's only one supplier out there that has a solution, you then cross the realms of environmental sustainability, trying to overlap with financial sustainability. And then, you know, my current bugbear, which I must bring out, is opaque PET. And I would love to hear Dudu's views. One is to engage within the network that we have as Pact, but we're now talking to other federations, for example, the Dairy Association. And I don't know if there are potentially issues of conflict on competition, where now it's multiple associations representing multiple members, brand owners, retailers, where if we could share more information at a deeper level, the reality is we could probably initiate change a lot quicker. So the positive is with Pact now getting a lot of traction. We've seen more positives, but obviously still a lot of work to do. So hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then maybe if we can get a quick comment from Dudu on Chandru's response, and then maybe we'll have time to address one or two questions in the chat. But alternatively, as I said, everybody can post more questions and we'll try and address them afterwards as well. But over to you, Dudu.
I think to respond specifically to that last point that you made, Chandru, about various industries then being involved, and it would be good if you're sharing, you're being transparent with the information that you're sharing with each other, if this would then impact competition law at all. I think with that, the principle stays the same on not sharing any competitively sensitive information. But I think sometimes a solution to something like this, and this is what is happening, as I said, in the EU and UK, where you have these guidelines, right, where you then are able to move together, and various industries are then also looking at that particular guidelines so that you can give effect to some of your objectives and purposes. And I think where we as industries, like your particular industry, like SA Plastic Pact, there could come an opportunity where we lobby government for these policies or frameworks that will then enable or give guidance in terms of how these multiple associations together could work together in a way that there is also transparency in terms of obviously the information that's being shared for that specific purpose and the outcome. So we also see that sometimes, in some of these collaborative engagements between maybe various industries, but in terms of one project, there is exemptions where you can apply to the commission formally that then exempts you from certain provisions of the act, like your cartel provisions, but only for a specific time, and also within a particular purpose or project project or objective, you know. So there are various solutions over time to this, but at the heart generally of competition law, wherever there's these engagements involving multiple parties, the concern is only where this starts to affect the way you individually compete in your individual business.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Judy. So we have reached the time of the end time of the webinar. So as I said, we'll unfortunately we couldn't get to the questions in the chat. I just wanted to say thanks very much to everybody that attended, as well as thanks very much to all our speakers, to Dudu, Chandru, Claire, and Devin. I think it was a very informative and interesting session, and we will definitely share the recording as well as the presentations afterwards. And as I mentioned, feel free to also send through any additional questions via email about this topic, and we will address those. Yeah, so thanks very much, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you
Yeah.
for organizing. Bye.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thanks.